Observe the schematic diagram. Most doctors focus too heavily on cholesterol and overlook the true root cause of clogged arteries, endothelial damage. When the endothelium is injured, nitric oxide, NO, drops, leading to increased clots, inflammation, higher blood pressure, and arteries that become thicker and stiffer, ultimately resulting in plaque formation. Plaque develops through a cycle of inflammation, repair, and the deposition of calcium, cholesterol, and protein. Supporting nitric oxide is essential, and sunlight with vitamin D, infrared exposure, nasal breathing, and magnesium all help raise NO levels. When NO is low, vasodilation is lost, clots increase, and the risk of heart attack and stroke rises, with 90% of heart attacks involving clots. The body can naturally remove cholesterol through reverse cholesterol transport, RCT, a process activated by niacin, HDL, exercise, fasting, a low-carb diet, and bile salts. Additionally, certain nutrients protect the arteries, magnesium helps regulate calcium, polyphenols safeguard the endothelium, and vitamin K2 prevents arterial calcification. There is a silent detail that determines whether your arteries remain open for decades, or whether they begin to harden, inflame, and accumulate plaques that can lead to a heart attack or a stroke without warning. This detail is not cholesterol itself, nor the number that appears on your blood pressure device. It is something much deeper and, for that reason, more often ignored: the integrity of the endothelium, the thin layer that lines every blood vessel in your body. When this layer suffers any injury, the entire cardiovascular physiology changes within minutes. The vessel wall loses its natural flexibility, blood pressure tends to rise, clotting becomes easier, and blood flow stops moving as freely as it should. But what really triggers the alarm is the process the body initiates to try to repair this damage. It begins to deposit calcium, proteins, and cholesterol as a kind of biological bandage, creating exactly what we fear most: arterial plaque. What almost no one explains is that these plaques do not appear out of nowhere. They are a direct consequence of continuous internal inflammation. It is the body trying to protect you, and at the same time putting you at risk when the cycle is not interrupted. Everything begins with a trigger that usually goes unnoticed: the drop in nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the main chemical command that tells the arteries when to relax, dilate, and allow blood to pass smoothly. Without it, the vessels behave like rigid tubes. Blood pressure rises, clots become more likely, and the heart has to work twice as hard to push blood through narrow, tense channels. Yet, contrary to what many people think, this drop is not an inevitable process of aging. It is accelerated by daily choices, inadequate diet, persistent inflammation, and the lack of natural stimuli that should keep the body in balance. And this leads us to another critical point: the way we deal with cholesterol. A large part of the population still believes that the cholesterol that clogs arteries comes directly from food. But most of it is produced by the body itself, especially when there is excess sugar, insulin resistance, and fat accumulation in the liver. When someone keeps eating refined carbohydrates, even if culturally normal, they force the pancreas to work at maximum rhythm. Insulin is released constantly to push glucose into the cells, trying to prevent sugar from staying in the bloodstream for too long. But this effort has a limit. After years of overload, insulin can no longer keep up. Sugar rises, the liver becomes overburdened, inflammation increases, and the endothelium pays the price. The interesting thing is that the body itself has a system for removing cholesterol from the arteries and returning it to the liver: reverse transport. This is the mechanism supported by HDL. It works like a rescue, collecting excess cholesterol deposited in the vessels so it can be recycled by the body's own physiology. But this mechanism needs favorable conditions to function well: adequate levels of niacin, fasting periods that reduce metabolic stress, more movement throughout the day, and especially fewer sugar spikes coming from ultra-processed carbohydrates. But there is another powerful component in this story: magnesium. This mineral is the natural counterbalance to calcium. While calcium contracts the arteries, magnesium relaxes them. Without enough magnesium, the vascular wall stays tense, rigid, and blood pressure rises. That is why so many people with chronic hypertension have a silent deficiency of this nutrient. In addition, magnesium helps the body produce more nitric oxide, directly reinforcing healthy vessel dilation. But magnesium does not act alone. Substances rich in polyphenol, natural compounds found in certain foods, are essential to protect the endothelium from new damage. They reduce inflammation, improve vascular flexibility, and help restore the body's ability to naturally produce nitric oxide. When this combination is present daily, the risk of arterial stiffness decreases and circulation improves noticeably. Another fundamental detail is vitamin K2. It directs calcium to where it should be, bones and teeth, and prevents it from depositing in the arteries, something that accelerates vascular aging. People with low K2 intake tend to have more arterial calcification, even with apparently normal exams. Most of these factors are ignored in traditional medical appointments because visible symptoms, high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, uncontrolled blood sugar, appear long after the endothelium has begun to suffer. Medicine usually acts at the end of the process, trying to correct numbers but not necessarily the root cause. That is why so many patients remain sick even while medicated. And this brings us to the central point of this video. There is a practical and simple way to stimulate all these biological pathways at the same time: nitric oxide production, endothelial protection, artery flexibility, and especially the interruption of the inflammatory cycle that initiates plaque. It is a natural food, rich in compounds that the body recognizes and uses as direct fuel to restore vascular balance. It does not replace healthy habits, it is not miraculous, and it does not solve everything on its own, but it is one of the few resources with real evidence that it can improve arterial function in just a few weeks. Now that you understand what truly initiates the process of arterial obstruction, we need to talk about the natural resource capable of acting on several of these points at the same time. It is a simple, accessible, and widely studied food, but one that few people use correctly. It not only stimulates the production of nitric oxide, but also protects the endothelium, improves vascular flexibility, and reduces arterial stiffness, one of the strongest markers of cardiovascular risk. This food is pure cacao, in its least processed form possible. We're talking about raw cacao, rich in flavonoids, especially flavanols, compounds that exert a direct effect on endothelial function. Unlike industrialized chocolate, which contains sugar, hydrogenated fat, and additives that cancel out the natural benefits of cacao, raw cacao preserves the bioactive components responsible for optimizing circulation. The impact is so evident that some studies have compared the effect of a daily dose of cacao with the effect of a session of moderate exercise, and the result was surprising: the dilation of the vessels was similar. This does not mean that cacao replaces physical activity, but it shows that in an inflamed and metabolically stressed body, certain foods work like a biochemical push, activating mechanisms that should be operating naturally but were inhibited by the modern diet. When flavanols enter circulation, they increase the availability of nitric oxide by stimulating the enzymes that produce this molecule, helping blood flow more freely. Another interesting point is that the effects of cacao are cumulative. It is not an immediate impact that disappears within a few hours. Daily use, even in small doses, helps train the arteries to respond better to dilation stimuli. This reduces stiffness, decreases arterial wall thickness, and improves vascular health as a whole, changes that would normally be expected only with intense lifestyle interventions. There are impressive studies. In one of them, participants between 50 and 80 years old consumed cacao rich in flavanols for only 2 weeks. The result was a reduction in arterial stiffness comparable to that of people up to 30 years younger. This shows that even at advanced ages, vascular plasticity still exists, as long as the body receives the right stimuli. But pure cacao does not act only on the arteries. It also benefits the brain by improving cerebral circulation, supports the skin by reducing chronic inflammation, and aids metabolism by containing antioxidant compounds that neutralize oxidative stress. In other words, by improving endothelial health, you simultaneously impact several systems of the body. To enhance these effects, many health professionals combine cacao with another powerful ingredient, beetroot. Unlike cacao, which stimulates internal nitric oxide production, beetroot provides natural nitrates that the body converts directly into nitric oxide. This duo not only expands vasodilation but also sustains higher levels of this molecule throughout the day. There are, however, some important recommendations to get the most out of this protocol. First, cacao must be consumed raw, without intense heat treatment, because high temperatures destroy part of the flavanols. The ideal is to mix it into warm water, never boiling. Second, consumption should be separated from coffee. Caffeine, especially in high amounts, causes vasoconstriction, the opposite of what you are seeking when consuming cacao. For those who want to maximize cardiovascular benefits, the ideal is to maintain a 2-hour interval between cacao and coffee. In addition, adding a small amount of magnesium, especially magnesium glycinate, can further reinforce the vasodilating effect, since this mineral relaxes the smooth muscle of the vessels and acts on the same biochemical pathway as nitric oxide. A pinch of sea salt can also help with cellular hydration and the proper transport of electrolytes. A common question is, how long does it take to see results? The answer depends on each person's metabolic state. Those who already have chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, or arterial stiffness tend to notice changes more quickly, precisely because the body was deprived of the right stimuli. However, the most important factor is not speed, but consistency. The accumulated effect, week after week, is what truly transforms the cardiovascular system. But none of this replaces the basics: adequate sleep, daily movement, a diet with fewer ultra-processed foods, and a living environment that reduces inflammation. No isolated food, no matter how powerful, surpasses the impact of a coherent routine. Cacao is a reinforcement, not a miracle. Likewise, it is worth remembering that supplements, as useful as they are, do not solve a problem that continues to be fueled by daily choices. If sugar consumption remains high, if the diet is poor in nutrients, or if the body lives in a constant state of stress, the endothelium will continue to be attacked. That is why cacao should be understood as part of a larger set: reducing glucose spikes, supporting liver function, reinforcing natural nitric oxide production, and giving the body the nutrients that restore its physiology. The power of cacao lies precisely in the fact that it acts at the root. It improves the endothelium, reduces stiffness, and increases the ability of the vessels to relax. That is why so many people report improvements in blood pressure, a feeling of lighter circulation, and even mental clarity after a few weeks of consistent use. As the next step, when you use this protocol regularly, you will notice that small daily changes, such as replacing inflammatory foods with options rich in flavonols, including magnesium, spacing out coffee, and adopting short periods of fasting, work together to create an environment in which the arteries are finally able to recover. None of this requires extreme measures. It only requires understanding, consistency, and the willingness to give the body what it needs to function as it should. When the endothelium begins to respond well again, the entire cardiovascular system follows. And this is how, with simple and sustainable decisions, you can directly influence the health of your arteries, not just for weeks, but for the rest of your life. If this content made sense to you and helped you better understand how to protect your arteries, don't leave this for later. Strengthen your health right now. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your decision can transform not only your life, but the lives of others as well.